This is Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media, and Dave Wemhoff was able to join us here in the WNIT Public Access Studios, downtown South Bend. The show, we're going to call it Citizens or Subjects, and you're going to see why. The pamphlet war, 1775, 1776, at the time Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. The most powerful Christian man in England seemed to be John Wesley, and he jumped in with a calm address to the American colonies. And here's how he closed the calm address to the American colonies, which then caused his second man, John Fletcher, to write some books on it. They just kept going back and forth. But the last two paragraphs kind of nailed what the issue was. In the third to the last paragraph, he closes by saying, "And remember your last charter, that of Pennsylvania, says in express terms you are liable to taxation. But a people will resume, you say, the power which they never surrendered, except no need of any exception. They never surrendered it at all," Wesley writes. "They could not surrender it, for they never had it. I pray, did the people, unless you mean the Norman army, give William the Conqueror his power? And to which of his successors did the people of England, 6 or 7 millions, give the sovereign power? This is mere political cant, words without meaning. I know but one instance in all history wherein the people gave the sovereign power to anyone. That was to the Massanello of Naples. And I desire any man living to produce another instance in the history of all the nations. 10 times over, in different words, you, quote, profess yourselves to be contending for liberty. But it is vain, empty profession, unless you mean by that threadbare word a liberty from obeying your rightful sovereign and from keeping the fundamental laws of your country. And this undoubtedly it is, which the confederated colonies are now contending for." So, Wesley lays that out, and then the number one historian at that time is a historian named David Ramsay. He was the historian, at least that's what I'm studying, that laid out the history of the time period of 1776. And he writes what the revolution really was. Okay, and the title of this article here is "The Difference Between a Citizen and a Subject." So the question is, citizens or subjects? So Ramsay wrote around 1776. The United States, or probably a little bit later, the United States are a new nation or political society, formed at first by the Declaration of Independence out of those British subjects in America who were thrown out of royal protection by an act of Parliament passed in December 1775. A citizen of the United States means a member of this new nation. The principle of government being radically changed by the Revolution, the political character of the people was also changed from subjects to citizens. The difference is immense. Subject is derived from the Latin word subjactio and means one who is under the power of another. But a citizen is an unit of a mass of free people who collectively possess sovereignty. Subjects look up to a master, but citizens are so far equal that none have hereditary rights superior to others. Each citizen of a free state contains within himself, by nature and the Constitution, as much of the common sovereignty as another. In the eye of reason and philosophy, the political condition of citizens is more exalted than that of noblemen. Dukes and earls are the creatures of kings and may be made by them at pleasure. But citizens possess in their own right original sovereignty. And they're drawing off John Locke, who claimed that in truth we were conceived or born, or we arrived on this earth free and independent. Now that is such a blatant, bold lie that it ought to just cause everybody to go, Are you kidding? Okay, because how did we get here? Well, back then, they didn't believe in evolution just yet. And people did go by the Bible because these guys were kind of stuck with what the Bible said. And what does it say? That God created Adam out of the dust of the ground. And then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul. Now, it says, that's chapter 2 of Genesis. Chapter 1, he says the same thing. He says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. He goes on, and then it repeats it. And God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. The Hebrew word there, to till, is the root word for slave. Okay? Adam was not free and independent of God. Okay? And the proof that he wasn't is that God told him, don't eat the fruit off that tree, and the day you eat, you'll die. And the serpent comes and says, no, I think you can get your freedom. No, the truth is, if you eat of that tree, you'll be as gods. You'll no longer be a slave. You'll be a citizen. You'll be free and independent. And Adam, we don't know what's going on here, but he made the move, and he said, I'll try it. Took a chance, and it didn't work. God said, the day you eat, dying, you will die. That's the Hebrew, dying, you will die. So he didn't die that day, but he did start dying because he was meant to live forever. So the principle of death entered into him. It says he lived 930 years and died. Okay. Now, what's interesting here is, before the fall, God said, take dominion over the animals. You rule over them, Adam. You are to rule over them. And it doesn't say the animals feared man. Okay, there's no fear at this point. But after the fall, then you have Noah. And Noah then, the flood is over, he's back on the earth, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the air, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Well, Adam had dominion over the animals, but it doesn't say fear. Here, boom, they're going to fear you. Okay, we're not taking any chances. Okay. And you could argue that the American Revolution, well, let's go back before the fall. Can't we do that? Can't it just be love?
I thought that's what the hippies were doing. They were going back to the garden.
Yeah. Can't we go back there? Yeah, but which way are you going to go? The way Christ says how to get there, or a way to get there out of your own imagination, which is going to be a repeat of Adam's mistake in some way?
It's going to probably be their own imagination or somebody's imagination.
Yeah. So, and we've gone through Gordon S. Wood. He said it was based on fear before the revolution, and then it became love. Well, before the fall, it doesn't say fear. After the fall, and you see it explicitly here with Noah, fear. And then we're talking about subjects and citizens. And it says in Proverbs 24, Ecclesiastes 10, fear God and the king. Okay. So fearing the king, that was the rule. You feared the king and you obeyed the king. And it puts them together oftentimes, fear God and the king. The American Revolution didn't like that. They said that's wrong. Perfect love casts out all fear. You know, they came up with their Lockean argument. But the argument really was, we're sovereign and free, and we give the king his authority over us. And at any time, we can take that authority back. He gets his authority from us. Why? Because we are sovereign and free by nature, by creation, by the origin of our existence. We were made independent and free. Now, how do you accept that? How do you say that that's true?
Well,
I mean, don't forget, our whole legal system assumes that that's true.
well, let's do a little history here.
Okay.
And we'll do more history later. So October 24, 1775, King George III goes to the Parliament. And he says, the colonies are in rebellion. We got to put down the rebellion.
Well, especially after the Boston Tea Party, where they did a violent act, the king had no choice but to do his duty and defend the injured party.
Well, this is October of 1775.
Yeah, so it's a couple of years later.
Right. So the king leaves. Isaac Barr, who was an English colonel who had been wounded in one of the many wars the English were in, stood up and he said, the Americans will fight and they will win. So what was it that got our forebears to fight and to win?
Number one, they thought they could win,
They thought they could win.
and that was quite tempting.
They had a lot of courage and they weighed the costs.
Well, hold it here. Hold it. How many people died in that war? How many years did it go on? 75
Well,
to
it went on
83?
for 8 years.
Yeah, and how many died?
About 4,500 American soldiers.
Wow.
That's not many.
4,500?
That's not many.
How many died at Pearl Harbor? 3,000?
No, I think it was 2,000.
Oh, that's all? Okay.
That's it. Yeah, I think that was it. But 3,000 in the Twin Towers when they went down.
Well, 4,500 is like almost nothing.
Well, it's low intensity, you would think, but they had a different type of warfare then. They had muskets. They didn't always have the rifle barrels on the rifles.
They had cannons.
They had cannons, but you know, a lot of the shooting kind of went wide, went far.
Okay.
It just didn't hit the target for whatever reason.
But they knew they could win.
They weighed the costs and they took a risk. And that is something that is in the American character and always has been in the American character, is this willingness to take a risk. Because let's remember something here, okay? They signed that Declaration of Independence. They put their names on this document that was going to go to the king at some point, and they were all wanted men. Every one of them was wanted. And Carroll was the only Catholic who signed it. He signed it, and then somebody said, oh, yeah, right, you're just going to sign John Carroll, right? Well, there are hundreds of John Carrolls. You know, you're just trying to get out of getting hung if we lose. And he said, okay. So he got back up and he signed John Carroll of Carrollton. I'm the Catholic guy. And so they know who he was. So these guys, they took risks. And you have to think that they knew that if they did not hang together, they'd hang separately, certainly. They knew that.
But what were they wanting? What were they hoping to get?
They were part of a tradition of people who took risks to settle this new land. That's what they were part of.
The Puritans took a risk coming over in 1607.
Sure.
Okay.
And everyone else who came over after them. I mean, you got to imagine, they didn't have Android phones and iPhones back then. They, you know, didn't have running water in a lot of places. And these were tough people making, you know, pushing out west.
Look at the Spanish. Look what they did.
Yeah. They beat
Right.
a superior civilization. Let me correct that. They beat a civilization that was more superior than the inhabitants of North America. The Aztecs, the Mayans, and they did it with alliances. That's how they did it. And with just a small number of people.
Very small.
But he did it with alliances of the Indian tribes, of the Central American tribes. There's a large way how he did it. And there was a moral justification for that, and the School of Salamanca put that out, and they explained that. And that's probably another topic for another day.
But I'm saying that happened before these our guys, and so this is how men were back then.
Yeah, they took risks and they fought, and they weren't afraid to fight. And what you had, you know, what was the reason for the American Revolution? Well,
Yeah, what were they hoping to? What did they want?
Well, this where probably you and I are going to disagree to a degree, okay? They knew they were a separate people. And I look at things, I stay in my lane, okay, but my area that I've studied, and that's, that's government, some business, I've done that. That's my area. So I look at this and I study it from that point of view. And so what the Americans were doing, what our forebears were doing 240 years ago, they were fighting for, a very large part, economic reasons. They were being crushed under the English.
In their mind.
They didn't have money. Thomas Pownall was a former governor of Massachusetts. He defended the colonists' claims. He wrote a number of in-depth analysis of what was going on. And I think I've mentioned him in the past on our show. And he wrote a lot about what was going on in the colonies. His brother was John Pownall, who was the secretary of the Board of Trade of the British Empire. These were guys who knew how things were supposed to run and how things were running. And Thomas Pownall said to the king, he said, hey, if you want to keep the colonies, this was in 1764 he wrote this, if you want to keep the colonies, you got to give them a little love here. I mean, you got to give them the ability to make money, to print money, to make specie, because they used coins as money. And they printed this paper money in the colonies, but it got everybody into trouble. So they said, yeah, it just became worthless, and it caused a lot of problems. So he said, allow them to create specie, okay? Allow them to create specie, back off on the navigation acts that are restricting their commerce.
But the colonists, by and large, had already made up their mind. They'd already made up their mind what they were going to do. So anything the king did, they were going to manipulate to get what they've already made up their mind they're going to do. They'd already made up their mind in the streets of Boston. We're going for independence. That's 1735. They were making up their minds. This is what we're going to do, and nobody's going to stop us.
I think that the Americans knew they were a different people. We are a different people from everyone else.
But I don't necessarily buy
that. And they wanted independence at some point.
Where I grew up in Wisconsin Dells, 15 miles away, Portage, Wisconsin, where I was born.
Yep.
15 miles away is Baraboo. We all knew we were different from each other.
Okay. Right.
We were totally different from the people from Portage.
I don't agree.
They were totally different than us.
I do not agree with you that the Americans wanted independence that early. I don't buy it. The Americans went over in the Continental Congress as late as 1774 and said, here's our grievances. Can we work this out? And whoever the prime minister at the time was, it wasn't Grenville, because Grenville was open to the Americans. It was North. I think it was North, Lord North. He said, get out of here. I don't want to hear it.
I would say that the base after 1607, the Puritans, and then Jamestown, 1620, the base was a strong Christian base, and the love of money and seeking after riches was forbidden. Okay, it was taught.
Where was this?
Amongst the Puritans, 1607. They had a lot of preaching against wanting to be rich.
And what happened to them? They died out.
Yeah, well, I'm saying it shifted because it's either you're serving mammon or you're serving God. Okay.
Well, and the Puritans were too extreme.
Whatever happened, that didn't hold. It didn't hold because people tend to be wicked and love money. Okay, and it shifted to commerce and love of money. Hide it what you want. Those are the two shifts. Paganism is the love of money, and let's just accumulate. Jesus said, "Do not lay up treasures here on earth." Okay, he said, "Do not do it." With food and clothing, let's be content and let's seek after the kingdom.
But that doesn't mean that you just give up any sort of work. That doesn't mean you try to better yourself.
No, we're talking being drunk on money. Okay?
Well,
we're talking being drunk.
There's two different things. Christ said you serve either God or you serve mammon.
Yeah.
Right? That's what he said. That's very clear, right?
Yeah, and was mammon the motivation for the revolt, for what they did? Was commercial mammon, was money and mammon the biggest factor in why they did what they did?
I think that was an element.
An element? Well,
yes, it was an element.
Was it a pretty big element?
Because they were being crushed economically.
Were they?
Yeah, they were.
And
eyewitnesses were saying that's what was going on.
And who did those colonies belong to?
Well,
I'm just asking legally. Who did
you're asking for part of the reasons why they did it. That's part of the reasons why they did it.
Okay, did they have a legal right to do what they did? Whose did they belong to? Who did those
colonies?
Under
the law of nations, if you are being oppressed, yeah, you can. You can throw off a tyrant if you are being oppressed and being destroyed. Under the law of nations, under the law of God, you can do that. A tyrant is somebody who goes against the will of
We
God.
live in postmodernism right now. If you want to call Jesus a tyrant, you can do it in a second. You can call anybody a tyrant. That's just who we are.
You and I have agreed on the word tyrant as meaning someone who does not follow the law of the triune God.
Right. And,
Okay.
and Witherspoon, who was the #1 minister in the country, and John Adams, both took on Thomas Jefferson. And on the floor of their Congress then, they said when Jefferson would ever say the king was a tyrant, they would both get in his face. He is not a tyrant because he was not breaking the law of God in his rulership. That's Witherspoon and Adams.
But who were Witherspoon and Adams?
Witherspoon was the...
Who was Witherspoon? Was he a Presbyterian?
Yeah.
He was a Presbyterian.
He tutored James Madison a whole extra year at Princeton.
A lot of
He
Americans
tutored over
were
100 of the
afraid.
founding fathers.
A lot of a lot of Americans were afraid of the Presbyterians because the Presbyterians were advocating power.
Presbyterians had developed a motto which is away from where the Puritans were. They were already gravitating away. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. That linked them up with the Masons. So you had the Presbyterians and the Masons linked together because they had the same belief as far as rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
Yes.
It brought them together.
Yes. In Catholic
problem
theology, you can overthrow tyrants.
But King
In
George
Catholic
was not a
theology, you can
tyrant.
do it.
That's their problem.
But he was a tyrant.
No, he wasn't
He
at all.
was a tyrant.
Witherspoon
He was crushing the American people.
Witherspoon was the president of Princeton, the #1 seminary. He taught everybody all these terms. And he said he's not a tyrant. He doesn't qualify as a tyrant. He's not breaking the law of God. He's ruling.
He is breaking the law of
No, he
God. When
wasn't.
you crush your own people and you take their things, you are breaking the law of God. Now, here's the point I've got for you. So if these were the Protestant ministers here that were telling all this truth.
There wasn't any Catholics here.
Well, no, there weren't. But the Protestants were unable to stop this revolt. The Protestant sects, the Anglicans, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, they were unable to stop the revolt. They couldn't stop it, could they? They couldn't stop it. It failed. Protestantism failed.
Well, hold it here.
If you're saying the revolt was
trying to
bad,
stop it?
then they failed.
Was there anybody over here trying to stop it?
They failed. Yes, there were some loyalists. There were
Yeah.
some Tories here. They were trying to stop it.
Right.
Right. But, a lot of them suffered a bad fate.
So you're saying that history has never shown any group of Catholics ever revolting. That's what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. We're
You're saying that,
we're talking about the American Revolution.
You're saying
I'm saying the Protestants were unable to stop this revolution.
No, you were implying that because
They
Protestants
unable
are,
to stop it. I'm making a simple point of fact here.
I know what you're saying. That
No, that's all I'm saying.
Protestants are inherently rebellious, and because they were Protestants, they went to rebellion. And you're implying that had they been Catholics, that would have never happened.
You're
Does history show
saying
that?
I'm implying that. The reality is, if you're sitting there in the Church of England, okay, you're sitting there in the Church of England, and you're looking at this, and you're watching all these little sects break away. But you're sitting there in the Church of England, and for like 1,500 years, the Pope is like the man, over even all of the rulers of Europe. And then all of a sudden, Henry VIII says, no, I don't think so, not anymore.
Yeah,
You're like,
no, that's huge.
whoa.
No, that's huge.
That's
huge.
huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's huge.
I'm not denying that.
I mean, that right there subverts the authority of King George III. That very simple fact subverts it. And the same thing with the Protestant revolt, with the Lutheranism in
you're saying that
in Europe.
but
They overthrew the Pope.
But if you say
and they
that,
said, boom.
If you say that, no king has any authority unless he's submitted to the Pope. That's what you're saying.
I told you I had some
No
ammunition.
king has any authority.
I got some
no ruler has
ammunition.
any authority unless he's submitted to the
I
Pope. That's
told
what you're
you
saying.
I have some ammunition here.
Okay.
I don't know. I took off the thing. This is from John Epstein. I don't know. It fell off. So I had it marked. But Epstein was of the view.
And what year was he?
John Epstein is one of these people who has been lost to history. He was born an Anglican, son of an Anglican minister. He converted to Catholicism in 1919. The only way you can find anything about this guy is by getting a jacket of one of his old books, from 1970. And John Epstein, born in 1895, died in 1988. Okay, and he was educated at Wellington and Hertford College. He served with the Friends Ambulance Unit during the First World War. He holds the OBE, which is the Order of the British Empire, and the Croix de Guerre. He's a Chevalier of the Belgian Order de Leopold and a Grand Officer of the Portuguese Order of the Infante Dom Henrique. So he's a pretty well-known guy. He served at the League of Nations, Secretary General of the Atlantic Treaty Association. And he was a Catholic, and he wrote a book called Has the Catholic Church Gone Mad? And this book came out in 1971. Every time I bring up that title, everybody smiles. They can't help but smile. And so he says, in this book, towards the end, he says, as for the campaign of the new American establishment, it is almost wholly negative, inspired by the deep-rooted anti-authoritarian spirit bred of that strange combination of Puritanism and the Enlightenment of the 18th century, which formed the American mind. It essentially is anti-papal and finds its natural allies in the old seed grounds of Calvinism and rationalism in Western Europe. By instinct, it criticizes or opposes all that the Pope teaches by virtue of his unique authority, be it the traditional tenets of the creed, the moral restraints upon sex, for the sexual obsession is most virulent in the post-Protestant countries. This book received a nihil obstat imprimatur from the Catholic Church in March of 1971. Okay, so this is a guy who knows what he was talking about, and basically he says there was this revolutionary thought in Americans, and it goes back to anti-papal. And the seeds of that anti-papal revolt are with Henry VIII and Martin Luther and the rest of them.
Right, but but however, if you had a Catholic country, and I'm not that good at history, so I can't verify if it's never happened. But if you did have a Catholic country, and something similar happened, then that would defeat completely what you're saying.
No.
Yeah, because you're saying
No.
the revolution happened because they're Protestants and they're leaning on
No,
Luther.
I'm
and
saying
they're leaning
Protestantism did not stop the revolution. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and would the Catholic have stopped it? If they were Catholic people, it wouldn't have gotten off the ground.
Your position has always been that Christianity says no revolt against the king. Well, all the Protestants were Christians. Under your position, then that should have stopped the revolt. But it didn't. Catholics have always said that you can overthrow a tyrant. That's why Francisco Franco overthrew the Republican government in Spain, and Oliveira Salazar came into Portugal, in 1926. That was a military coup, because those were tyrannical regimes that were operating against the law of God. I'm saying the British Crown was operating against the law of God as to the American people, and I'm also saying that the British Crown, by virtue of the fact that it threw off the papacy, invalidated itself and actually led to the American Revolution. The Americans are a different people. We are a nation. We are a nation. There is a nation of people, which John Epstein also explains in another book that has an imprimatur and a nihil obstat.
Well, Americans, the experiment was founded on a Lockean principle, like I read in the beginning, that we are subject to nobody because we're independent and we're free. And we temporarily make ourselves, by a social contract, we make an agreement to give up some of our independence that's native to us.
We all know that sounds just ridiculous, doesn't it? The Lockean theme.
Well, everything's based on that.
Oh, I know. No, I know. You and I totally agree on that. We totally agree. The Lockean theme is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So who was John Locke? Where did this come from? Isn't that a fair inquiry?
Well, he was Robert Filmer was an aristocrat, born into royalty, Sir Robert Filmer.
Sir Robert Filmer, right?
Yeah,
Okay, right.
and he wrote.
He supported the king, right? King James.
Yeah, the royalist, and he supported the bad term, which makes people freak out, the divine right of king, which in my mind, does the husband have authority from God, according to tradition and scripture? Does he have authority from God to command his wife? So when the husband commands his wife to do something and she disobeys him, is she disobeying God? The church says yes, she's disobeying God. Yes.
Okay.
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 The king takes in that, but more because he gets his authority straight from Adam when God told Adam, take dominion over the earth.
Divine right.
Adam was a king. Call him what you want. Nobody was above Adam. Everybody had to obey Adam. And when Adam died, common sense would tell you government still ruled on the earth after he died. There was an order after he died. That meant somebody took Adam's place. Maybe a couple people took his place. Maybe one took his place. But somebody had that authority. Not everybody. Not everybody, which is what the Patriots want to say. After Adam died, everybody became equal. They were all kings. They were all rulers. That's insane to believe that. And that fits, though, into John Locke's. It merges with Locke.
Well, yeah, so Locke came up with this ideology, right? He came up with an ideology.
Take on Filmer to defeat the divine right of king argument.
Right, because why was that? Because the kings were really powerful. The King of England was in charge of the church. Holy cow, he could appoint the bishops and the priests. I mean, he had a lot of power.
Oh, no, it was wrong. I believe it was wrong.
Okay, so don't you think the subjects knew that too? The subjects of that king knew that was wrong.
What's the theme in the Old Testament with all the kings? What's the constant
Might
theme?
makes right. You better win the fight.
The theme is, let's say the book of Esther. For example, it's all throughout the Old Testament.
You know the Bible better than I, so I'm going to defer
The
to you.
story of the book of Esther is that Queen Vashti was ordered by the king to come to his party, which was coming to a 180-day party coming to a close, and she refused to come.
180-day party?
Yeah.
That's a
Persian
long
Empire was
party.
huge.
I don't even think L.A. has parties that long.
Yeah, well, they did. And a lot of them got AFib from all the alcohol. But she refused to come, okay? So the wise men said, okay, king, your kingdom is done, because if everybody goes back and they find out she refused to come and she gets away with it, they're all going to disobey their husbands, and your kingdom literally will be over, okay? So he gets rid of her. He gets Queen Esther, who's under her uncle, Mordecai. Mordecai, the king found out when he's reading late at night about there was a plot to overthrow the king. And Mordecai saved him from the plot. There's always a plot to overthrow the king.
There's always a plot
Okay.
to overthrow the king.
And it could be a 10-year plot, could be a 50-year plot, it could be a 5-day plot, it could be a 5-minute plot. They might have got the idea in 5 minutes. But usually, they got a plan.
You got to have a plan.
Okay.
That's what I remember from that movie, Tremors. You got to have a plan.
And Americans are going to be always plotting because that's who they are.
Americans take risks. It's in our DNA as a people. We take risks.
Yeah, but hold it here.
We've had to do that for a very long
No.
time. Now let's talk about the Lockean philosophy and the socioeconomic and the historical setting that you're talking about, because the king had a lot of power. Okay, James I had a lot of power. Charles I had a lot of power.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like that they had. Basically Henry VIII said, "I'm now spiritual head."
Right,
Which is ridiculous.
Right.
Okay?
It is ridiculous.
Because
Right,
that really got it lopsided. But he had no intention of changing any Catholic doctrine initially.
Well, initially, right.
Well, I'm just saying.
But no, I know. But I mean, it's bound to change. Once you break off, then you're going to have problems. Schism and heresy are closely related. They follow one or the other. But in any event, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with a group of Englishmen who want to make money. Okay, this was there in the late 1500s into the 1600s. That they were developing. They wanted to take a risk. They wanted to go to Cathay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but see, they're taking a risk because the Bible says, "But they that will be rich," King James, "they will be rich, fall into temptation and a snare, and many huge trouble after trouble. For the love of money is the root of all evil, from which those who went after it, another list of trouble." So they were wrong. Okay, if they're going after money.
But you
wrong.
understand, it was also with the approval of the crown. It was approved by the crown. So they were trying to get over to Cathay. Well, they ran into North America in the meantime. So then they had to figure out what are we going to do with North America? And they found out two things. They found out there are goods that we can trade, and there's plantations that we can develop. We can grow stuff. Okay? So how are we going to work this? So these guys are kind of thinking on their feet because they're a little bit different, from the Spanish model. You kind of walk in, you conquer, you take it. People do this. Everybody's kind of.
This is where the power is.
The power in England was with the trade.
Yeah.
It was with the Board of Trade. That was the power.
Connected to the state.
And that was connected to the state. And one of the biggest, most important guys in that whole situation was Lord Ashley. Andrew Ashley Cooper, First Earl of Shaftesbury, I believe. And he was the benefactor of John Locke. And he had John Locke working for him as a secretary. And John Locke wrote information about Cape Fear, North Carolina. Why you guys should move down there and set up shop, and we're going to give you 100 acres, and you're going to have religious liberty, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have all this stuff. Because the English wanted to beat the Dutch in the 1600s, and the Dutch were incredibly prosperous for a number of reasons, and the English studied them.
Yeah, they were the leaders. I mean, New Amsterdam.
They had it was great.
New York. Yeah.
And so what the English found out, they found out certain things. They found out like religious liberty really works. You know, we're not going to force people to belong to anything, and they can come in from all over. We're going to let them do whatever they want. So we want religious liberty.
It works for what end? Making money?
To making money. It's good for industry. Yeah. Madison said the same thing 150 years later. So this is what was observed by this guy, Josiah Child. Josiah Child was the head, the governor of the East India Company, and he was a good friend of Lord Ashley.
No, let me just slip this in, because in America, government is not supposed to be involved in making money. Where
they had
in a sense, government was.
They had a mercantilistic
we don't understand
system.
that.
No, we have a capitalist system. They had a mercantilist system where the crown basically controlled it. The government controlled it. You kind of have that in China right now. Okay. You have a mercantilist system. The government controls it, and the government takes a part of everything that you guys do, and they set up the rules. So,
okay.
So
China's
Child,
a little bit like
Child,
that, yeah.
So a little bit. Child and Ashley sat down and they said, what can we do to make the colonies work, to make money, and to make England a lot of money? Okay, and so they came up with all these practical ideas. And Johnny Locke, a faithful servant of Lord Ashley, wrote all that down. And he wrote his philosophy based on those practical maxims learned by businessmen and merchants to make a society productive.
Right, but it says in Scripture.
Well, I am telling you.
I know it.
This is what the research shows.
Teaching things which they ought not to for filthy lucre's sake.
If you want to know what is behind Locke's philosophy, that's what it was. Okay. It was a way to create a commercial society, and his ideas got real currency in the colonies with Cato's letters of 1720 to 1723, and these ideas resonated with the Americans because the Americans are risk takers, and Americans saw a big opportunity to make a lot of money because there's a lot of land here and there's a lot of commerce. And one thing the Americans had, and then please talk to me about Titus, one thing the Americans had was they had lumber in great supply. And what do you need lumber for? You need lumber for ships. For the mass of ships, okay? And the Americans built ships, and when they didn't have the money, they built their own machines. And they got better than the English, according to some historians. So there was a real competition there. And people have a right to improve their way of living. They have a right to work and enjoy the fruits of their labor. They have that right. That is a God-given right. That is something the church has always recognized.
Okay, but if the church was doing its job in an ideal situation, if the church was doing its job, they would have challenged Locke's teaching.
Well, they have.
I'm saying then, and he wouldn't have got such influence because the church would have kept him in his place. But
they didn't want the Catholics in England or in the colonies. John Locke was a Christian. He said, "I'm a Christian."
Nah.
Well, that's what he said.
Dabney said
so he's an Anglican, I guess.
Dabney said he was a baptized atheist.
Well,
baptized after Hobbes of Marbury.
He gave he wrote a book. He wrote a lot of stuff, but one of the things he wrote was about human understanding. You probably know about it, about human understanding, and he says basically all you got is human reason in the Scriptures. That's all you got. And of course, anything the Catholic Church says, well, that's got to go. But anyways, what you had was Jonathan Edwards picked up Locke's teachings in that area. And he spread those in the Great Awakening. Well, that had an impact on people.
Yeah, they were the Great Awakening.
And
Kinda
this
made things superficial.
and what the Great Awakening did, I'm sorry, and then go. But what the Great Awakening did is it even further broke down the institutionalized churches. This guy Tom Derflinger wrote a book. He's dead now, but he wrote a book, a very good book about the merchants in Philadelphia. And he said the merchants in Philadelphia at that time advanced by being members of the Anglican Church socially. So you became a member of the church.
Well,
you
George
believe in
Washington
exactly.
was always considered by, I mean, reading this book on Lincoln, how he was an infidel. Washington was just assumed. In all Washington's writings, you'll hardly ever find the word Jesus Christ. Okay. He was a Mason. I mean, yeah, he didn't go to all the meetings and that, but he was a deist. But he was an elder in the church kind of thing, because it was connected to the, like being a city council member, right? It was connected.
It was connected. That's correct. It was connected in that society. And so what you had is you had commercialism going to basically the philosophy of Locke. So when people write these books and these essays about Locke's philosophy, you needed to step it back one and understand what he was trying to do, which was to justify a commercial system, a commercial society.
Right. Like it says in King James, teaching things which they ought not to for filthy lucre's sake. It says in the Revised Standard, for there are many insubordinate men, empty talkers and deceivers, especially the circumcision party. They must be silent, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for base gain what they have no right to teach. For base gain, filthy lucre. But Locke's teaching on the family is what Gordon S. Wood said was most revolutionary. So that would fit into what it says. Upsetting whole families. Subverting, and King James says, subverting whole families. Because once the money takes grip, then the family is secondary. People start they're doing like what Judas did to the other 11 apostles and Jesus. He betrayed them, okay? And in a sense, then you end up betraying your local community, your family. It's subtle, but your decisions are now being made more commercially.
And and that's a good point. I mean, that's a good point. And so what you got is you got a society, domestic society is supposed to help the person, which means materially and spiritually, and support the family, a right-ordered family. And even John Epstein writes about a right-ordered family. Again, in one of his books that has a nihil obstat imprimatur. He talks about a right-ordered family and about, the man's the head of the family, and the woman does basically what she's told. That's how families are supposed to run. And he says that is the right-ordered family, and this is how you have civil authorities come about to protect that. And the civil authorities are part of the community of nations, which is supposed to ensure that too. Okay, so that's why you hear the popes always talk so much against war, because war, disturbs that. Okay, that's why you hear it.
Well, you could argue, and it looks like a small matter, but the Anglicans allowed physical punishment by the husband on the wife. The Puritans didn't allow it. This is my understanding. Okay, the Puritans did not allow that, or they didn't teach that was right. So now, if your wife refuses to obey you, you cannot resort to you can't coerce her, so to speak. Okay, which is how our laws are now. Okay, so if your wife refuses to take your command or your lead or however you want to say it, you can't do anything about it physically. And if you scream at her, that counts too. You can't do that. I mean, so your hands are tied to command your ship, okay? You're the commander of the ship, and you better command it and run it right, but you're not allowed to command it. You can only get her consent, okay? You have to manipulate consent, because that's Locke, okay? Because she's her own sovereign. You are totally equal in sovereignty. That's our law. And that comes from Locke. Okay.
Yeah, it does, and that is a commercial thought. We're all equal bargaining. Contract. We all have the right to make. If you think about it, if you give it some thought, where the Catholics went, is another story. But I think that what you always have in history, you always have people who go over the line. They do something too severe, and then somebody is there to take advantage of that and bring it back. And I think in a way that's kind of what Filmer went a little bit too far. At least they said that, right?
They
and
argued
then
that
they
he did.
came back.
Yeah.
But Locke was there setting out these principles, okay, to base upon a liberal order, base the liberal order on these principles. And it was clearly from what I'm reading, it was clearly from Lord Ashley and the whole mercantile class of the English who gave them the ideas. And they did that from their day-to-day experience of trying to make a prosperous society. And there's a lot of economic aspects, land, the physiocrats, and the amount of inflation you can have, and the amount of interest you charge. And they talked about all that stuff too. That was all more mechanical.
Right. But Jesus said the Pharisees were blind, and it says the Pharisees were lovers of money. Okay, so once you.
But excuse me, let me interrupt you. But that's the importance of the religious liberty aspect of what Locke was writing about. Okay, and he said in his Toleration and also in the Treatise of Government, you're not there, government. You're not there, but to protect property. Okay, you're not there to enforce morality. Well, of course not, because he'd been writing the tracts. He'd been writing the advertisements to get people to go to Cape Fear, North Carolina, and that didn't work. Okay, but the reality is it worked in Holland and it worked elsewhere in the colonies. Okay, but so they saw this religious liberty, a government that's divorced from religion. Okay, they saw this as a good thing to increase economic activity. James Madison confirmed that in his April 1774 letter. So this is the dynamic that I am seeing, we are seeing with Locke.
Yeah, and we see it, let's say where the rubber meets the road, I don't know. Let's say you got a judge or you have a lawyer and you have divorce, okay? And the question is, in a perfect world, the judges and the lawyers are vehemently against the divorce. They're going to follow, let's say they're Catholic, they're going to follow Catholic teaching, which is against divorce, and they're going to be in harmony with that, and they're going to do everything they can to say, no, I'm not going to be involved. I'm not going to allow myself to be involved in promoting a divorce at all, okay?
Right, well, that goes to the issue of society is there to protect and defend the family. Divorce hurts a family, right?
Right, but the problem is if you can make money. See, here's where the money interest comes in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like splitting the atom. I mean, if you can find a market, well, then you don't want anybody keeping you from getting into that market. That's amatory fanfani, Catholicism, Protestantism, and capitalism. The capitalist spirit, the desire to make money, has got to knock down barriers none of it's making. That having been said, these powerful economic interests will use everything to their benefits, to include nationalism and religion.
If somebody commits a crime and you're in the prison industry, well, doesn't bother you. You make money on crime, okay?
Got another prisoner.
And certain types of lawyers perhaps may believe that they monetarily benefit by crime.
Who would think that?
And so when push comes to shove, when they could be doing all they can to promote morality, they're not all that excited.
I'm excited about morality.
Yeah, but you're either more excited about you love one, Jesus said, or you hate the other, okay? And I wish you're either hot or cold because you're lukewarm, okay? So you're really confronted with love one or hate the other, okay?
Well, I've known lawyers who have gone to FBI agents and said, "Thank you very much for the work you do because you're helping my business." I've heard that.
Well, I'm shocked. Well, I'm not, okay? Because
we have a system where everybody's entitled to representation. And whether people are of different nations, and there are different nations of people in this society, that is one of the good things of the American jurisprudential system. It is not supposed to look at people based on your different nationalities. You're all supposed to be treated the same. Supposed to be.
Yeah.
Okay, under the law. Okay.
But like we opened up the show here reading.
And the Catholicism teaches you can't deny nations their fundamental rights. Oh boy, what are we talking about fundamental rights? That's another discussion. What are we talking about fundamental rights? Well,
Okay.
John Epstein talked about that too.
Okay.
But what we are actually talking about in fundamental right is not the right to speak or not the right to the freedom of press. It is a lot of other things. It is things like on page 259, which is very basically the body of rights belong to all peoples, whatever the accidents of their birth, which means whatever their ethnicity, whatever their race, whatever it is, which should be respected in their mutual relations, are the right to conserve themselves in being. Well, what does that mean? It means, the Catechism, I believe, kind of expounds upon that more. I believe what the Catechism says is, well, you got to have food and housing and medical care and, recreation and work, these kind of
Well, the Bible says, with food and clothing, let us therewith be content. I think it's the same idea.
I think it's the same idea. Okay, so conserve their being. To develop according to their nature. Okay, to develop. That means, boy, that's a big thing, to learn things, to not just simply be locked in a closet, but to mature, basically.
You should have a right to develop a skill to make a living based on your inclination.
A skill to make a living and have culture and have those things that makes you a human being, to hold property, to bequeath it property, to trade, to travel freely. Let me correct something here, to trade. Okay, so a lot of people say, well, the Catholics are for free trade. No, that's not true at all. They cite to the school of Salamanca. I've had this discussion with other people. They cite to Vittoria. Vittoria never said that. What Vittoria said is you can have trade provided it doesn't hurt people. Okay? So you got to keep
that. You're not taking advantage of them.
Exactly.
Through covetousness, they will, with feigned words, make merchandise out of you.
Exactly. He laid open the door for industrialization of countries and trade to be, fair, basically. Be fair, not free. But sometimes you hear him quoted as saying free trade. The right to speak their maternal language, the right to follow their own domestic and religious customs, be they not contrary to the natural law, to choose or obey their own local authorities, to choose. So they get to select their authorities and give them certain powers, which kind of goes to something we talked about before. Civil society, then international society, is formed for these purposes, to promote the welfare of families that compose them, and culture is there to mature people, make them mature humans.
And America at its best was consciously trying to promote things like this.
Like what?
These kind of freedoms.
Yeah.
You had
so.
Franklin D. Roosevelt, the four freedoms or this and that. But I'd say in the 50s, Catholics were tuned into stuff like this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you're right. I think the Americans, for a very long time, kept to a real sensible natural order way of things. The problem was, the leadership didn't.
Well, the subversion. We end up not thinking about it, but we ended up fighting alongside Joe Stalin, and then we betrayed Chiang Kai-shek, and now we're promoting Mao Zedong. That came from the State Department primarily. So we're being subverted. And this is what people are dealing with right now.
The leadership are betraying us, and people are understanding that.
Well, it's not just the leadership, the bureaucracy.
Well, I'm saying that includes that.
Okay.
Because the bureaucracy is going to follow whatever the leaders are. And people say we're in a bureaucratic state. Okay. But the leadership, the civil authorities are betraying us in the minds of many people. And definitely the plutocratic elites that operate outside the system but influence the system inordinately, they definitely are betraying people. And people are understanding that. They know there's something not right. That's why you're getting Christian nationalism.
Do you think if the church started preaching like they used to way in the old days against the love of money, and all that would take power away from the plutocrats? If the people did not value money like they are now?
I think the church needs to go and convert the plutocrats. They need to knock on Bill Gates' door and George Soros' door, and they need to start trying to convert these guys. Another thing that they need to do, the church needs to say, hey, American people, this is who you are. You're a separate people on this planet, okay? And you have a purpose that God has given you, and let us talk to you and purify those elements of your culture that are impure.
Okay, but I would say the problem is that we worship wealth. And that in some ways the church worships wealth, in some ways the priests worship wealth, and they need to quit doing it.
Yes, a lot of people worship wealth. I don't doubt that.
In many subtle ways.
In many subtle ways, and wealth has become the determiner of value, right? By the way, how much are we making for this? But anyways, so wealth has become the determiner of value. You're right, I agree with that. But what I'm also saying too is that in every society there's a hierarchy. Even in America, there's a hierarchy. And the people who are materially successful, who are very wealthy, that's your leaders. In any community, they're the people who've got to be converted.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Because they exert influence.
Yeah, they have been successful in being good entrepreneurs or whatever and making a lot of money. But the church does not teach, tradition and scripture does not teach that necessarily is admirable, okay? Just because you can make a lot of money, that doesn't prove that you're a good person.
The making of money has to be properly ordered.
Yes.
The Catechism says that. It has to be properly ordered.
But the church usually almost always assumed that the rich people got it in many unjust ways.
Well, many people think that, but
The early church definitely thought that.
yes. And what you have to do is you have to properly order business and economics to serve the people. And the American system, I'm sorry, and the church talks about the civil authorities making sure that that happens, okay? But Locke and his guys, no, they didn't want that. Take away the religion aspect of it, following the law of God. They didn't want a strong government. They wanted to influence the government. That was the idea behind his philosophy. That was in Montesquieu.
So how do you get that turned around?
Well, he always asks me the easy questions at the end of the show, and I don't have time to propound on them. Well, I'm going to ask you that question. So how do you turn? Well, you convert people, right?
Yeah, I say you convert them and you really get them to separate themselves from the love of mammon, like everybody's addicted to, and not admire it, okay? And not consider these people successful.
Well, you got to give something in its place. You got to teach that there's more. You got to right order it.
You're going to have to really reward people that succeed.
Yeah.
And not chasing after money like everybody does. You have to reward them. You have to say, these are our heroes now.
Yeah, even Pope Francis says we have to reform the economic system. Right. You got to put the economic system in service to man.
Yeah.
Not the other way
and if
around.
you are a priest running a parish, you're going to have to figure out how to implement that.
At a level, yes. I mean, the bishops have got to do that, and the cardinals, and the church does. But the church is all throughout all these countries of the world, and they can work on all these people everywhere.
Okay. This is Peter Helland with Dave Wemhoff on Citizens for Community Media.